After the fight between Lion and Kay, things got worse. Way worse. And I had to decide whether to report something that might save a life or to stay quiet and hope I wasn't an accessory to a murder. Lesson 1. Death threats need to be taken seriously. When someone's mental health deteriorates, their actions can turn from strange to dangerous, and you might not know how far they've gone until it's too late. To recap, my roommate Kay had woken up to Lion having sex on Kay's desk, totally naked, and Lion had told him to get up and leave the room. Kay obviously had refused, and the woman had gotten dressed and run out of the room while they argued. That only made Lion even angrier, and after the argument got even more heated, he stormed out. It was now October 22nd, 2012, the day after the huge argument, and that afternoon, the same woman who'd slept with Lion approached me in the library, and she asked me what was wrong with him. She told me about how Lion had originally wanted to be friends with her, or at least told her he would be her friend, and she told me that she had been attracted to him and admitted that she'd developed a crush on Lion, and she'd used the concept of prostitution as a low-stakes way to get sexual. But after he'd brought porn into the picture, they had an argument about the laptop burn he'd given her. And he'd gotten so angry that he'd physically assaulted her, punched her straight in the head hard, and knocked her to the ground. She'd seen a side of him that terrified her, and she didn't want to have anything to do with him anymore. That's why she had come to me. She was afraid of him, and what else he might do to her. Then suddenly she unloaded everything, telling me the full story of how she hadn't really been interested in sleeping with people to make money, but had just wanted to become more sexually experienced after having a strict home life in high school. And she'd actually only had sex with 2 people in her entire life, one of whom was Lion, and now she didn't know if she ever wanted to have sex again. I told her about some of the other problems I'd seen with the way Lion treated people, and she agreed that he was not good for her. And she decided to try to officially end things with him in an apologetic way that might calm him down rather than anger him, so that she'd be safe long term and could move on without worrying that he'd target her throughout the rest of the school year. However, this escalated things in a way that I did not anticipate. That night, while I was at the cafeteria eating dinner with the ALN crew, Lion called me. Despite everyone at the table telling me not to, I answered. He'd just been broken up with, so to speak, and he was furious. Furious about the woman's decision to keep her distance from him. Furious with Kay for waking up during what was now guaranteed to be his last time having sex with that woman. Furious at the world. He said things about the races and genders of the people he hated, some seriously obscene that I cannot repeat. And then he said the thing that chilled me to the bone. He said, "I feel like I'm going to murder Kay in his sleep if I stay here tonight." This wasn't one of his weird jokes. He meant it. He sounded resigned, as though he'd thought it through for a long time. He even mentioned the knife he always carried being the murder weapon he was going to use to kill him. I asked him where he was right now. He wouldn't tell me. This wasn't the first time he'd gone off somewhere and wouldn't tell me where. And then he hung up, and I thought about this. Maybe he was speaking hyperbolically. Maybe he wasn't. He was essentially saying if he returned to the dorm room, Lion would kill Kay using the knife he kept in his pocket. But maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe he was just upset. I weighed the possibilities in my mind, took note of his recent history of physical violence and the other side of him that the freshman woman had mentioned earlier that day. I went back to the table, told my friends what had happened, and they encouraged me to call campus safety, aka Campo. Part of me hesitated, remembering that familiar refrain, "Snitches Get Stitches," but my friends pressed me on it and told me it wouldn't be safe for anyone if I didn't. Everybody knew something was wrong with this guy, but I was the only one that had enough information and evidence to actually do something about it. I thought long and hard about what to do here, and I remembered that earlier in the day I'd seen a quote from Russell Means, whose name in Lakota is Oyate Wachiampi, which means works for the people, and the quote read, "My hope is that you will all continue to dedicate yourselves to the work to which I have tried to commit my life, liberation and freedom for my Lakota people, for all indigenous peoples, and in fact, for all peoples." And I thought to myself that Russell wouldn't have wanted me to let others continue to live in fear of a racist and sexist person's physical violence. So I had no idea about this at the time, but that quote from Russell Means, that was one of the last things that he said before he died. And he passed away that same day that this all happened, October 22nd, 2012. I was just shocked looking back on this because Russell Means was from the Lakota tribe. And when I had read this quote, I didn't know that I had Lakota blood in my veins as well. I didn't know I had Lakota ancestry. Somehow I was still aware of what he had said just before his death, but it was important to me and it impacted the decision that I made that day. It was kind of nuts for me to wrap my mind around that looking back at it over 10 years later. Anyway, back to the story. I saw real opportunity here as well. I didn't want to get into a knife fight, even though I almost had back in season 2, episode 7. And I knew that if we could convince the school that if he was as dangerous and unhinged as we'd discovered he was, they'd probably remove him. And our quality of life would drastically improve. We'd be able to feel safe at night and actually sleep in the morning, knowing our alarm clocks would still be set to wake us up. I'd kept my mouth shut for about a month and a half, but I didn't see myself being able to make it through the rest of the year as things were. I didn't want the woman he'd hurt to go through the rest of the year in fear either. Even then, it was too heavily ingrained in me not to snitch for me to take a drastic step like talk to authority figures. So I settled for telling Kay before doing anything else. I met up with Kay, and we came to the conclusion that Lion had a specific pattern of behavior. Lion believed in a social hierarchy due to race and gender that put himself towards the top, and he was prone to violence towards those he saw as below him on that hierarchy, and he definitely saw Kay as below him. So we decided the best thing to do was to talk to our RA and ask him what to do in a situation like this. After our RA heard what was going on, he immediately brought campus safety to talk to us. It felt like as soon as our RA knew, we'd started something that had instantly gotten out of our hands. In a whirlwind of motion and questions, they changed the lock on the door to our room and told Kay to leave right away. But they told me to wait in the room for Lion to come back, alone. No one stayed with me. No one even waited nearby. I was the bait. And I did it because I thought it would make things safer for everyone. But I won't lie, I was scared. They told me to write down my statement in the meantime, so I worked on typing up what I could remember of my interactions with Lion. I knew this was going to be submitted to the administration, so I tried to make sure my statement was like PG to PG-13, but still as accurate as I could convey while I was waiting for him to come back. It was hard to focus on it because, again, I was the bait waiting for him to come back, but I did the best I could. However, the woman that he'd physically assaulted had asked that I leave her out of it, so I didn't write about that. I felt like it wasn't my place to expose her side of the story, especially when she'd specifically asked me not to. After a stressful period of time that felt like at least an hour, I heard a key slide into the lock, and then a knocking on the door when the key didn't work. I called Campo from my cell phone when Lion tried to get in and his key wasn't working, but whoever picked up didn't know who I was or what I wanted. They hadn't even told the other campus safety officers what was going on. I tried to whisper into my phone to explain, but Lion heard me on the phone and told me to let him in, banging on the door and jiggling the handle. I ignored him, went to the far corner of the room and tried to quietly explain into my phone what was going on, and then I waited. Lion knocked, said things, banged on the door, kicked at it, and tried his key again for a while, but then he seemed to give up. I waited in silence to see if he would return. I was waiting for so long that I uploaded a video to YouTube showing stock footage I'd taken around Venice. I was doing anything I could to take my mind off of the situation around me, but it was tough. I must have waited in absolute silence for at least an hour to make sure it was safe, and then I looked through the peephole, still didn't see anyone, so I quickly ran upstairs to a friend's room where I found my friends, the same ALN crew that I'd had dinner with, holed up talking about what had happened. They told me that a Campo officer had tackled Lion in the hallway and had taken him away for questioning over half an hour ago. They'd used me as bait and never even told me I was safe. I wondered why they'd done that, since they easily could have put a Campo officer in the room instead, and he could have opened the door and confronted him instead of making me stay there. Or they could have called me to let them know that they'd got the guy and that I was safe, but they chose not to do that. I figured that what I was doing was for a good cause, improving both my own safety and the safety of people around me, so I put up with it, but it still felt weird that they'd take a risk with a student like that. You know, it wasn't that difficult to kick down a door, especially in a building as old as Stauffer. This wasn't the end, though. That would have been too easy. Instead, a member of the administration angered me so much that I considered him to be an enemy to safety. I did what I thought was right in this situation, but what happened next made me question whether the school had our backs at all. That's almost another story in and of itself, though, so tune in next week to get the scoop on that one.